I'm going to do a quick, very, very quick, fast blast about investigative journalism for Carrie, who asked me how you go about starting to work on a particular case, on a particular subject as an investigative journalist. So, had a thought about that. I was going to bring out some stories that I'd worked on and talk about them, but then I thought, no, it's best to address that as an overall picture. So when she mentioned Marilyn Monroe and wanting to investigate Marilyn Monroe and her death. Um, I'd also seen something on Netflix recently, I think it's called Seascape. It's a freelance journalist who did a YouTube investigation of film on the seas, the high seas. I had done in the past investigations into Hillside Strangler, Kenneth Bianchi, formed that into a book. Also, investigations into various paramilitary groups. And so it starts off with an idea. Investigative journalist starts off with an idea. And the idea, you might have got that from a TV program, you might have got that from some kind of passion that's always been there since childhood. You might have got that from reading a story in a newspaper or a magazine, but the idea is then born into your mind, and you decide that you want to investigate it. Now, you could just want to investigate it for yourself, and it's not going to go anywhere after that. You could want to investigate it for a movie, for a book, or for a newspaper piece. Any of those things is fine. So, where to start? And I think that was Carrie's question, where to start. So, first of all, any good investigator has to start with other people's work. Now, it might sound like, oh, but hang on, you have to be unique. You can't copy other people. It's not copying, it's your point of start. Now, when I first went out to Belfast and walked around and had an awakening in me that I wanted to investigate tribalism over in Belfast, I wanted to investigate why some of the IRA didn't go along with the Good Friday Agreement. I didn't really know where to start. I didn't have any knowledge at all. So I started off by getting books. I brought a book in the airport on the way back to London from Belfast, and it wasn't really a book that I needed to read, but I picked it up. It was about the Shank Hill Butchers. It was about the only book that was there in the airport, the Shank Hill Butchers. And I read about how the UDA had just, picked up Catholics off the street, taken them into bars and tortured them. It's a really hard book to read, and it got over to me the horror of what was going on in Belfast, and I wondered why. I have always investigated evil. I've always, with big events that have happened, what's really going on? Is it what people say? Oh, this person and that person is evil, or is it some kind of underlying force? So that's been a lifelong investigation for me about where evil comes from. Is it in man or is it something else? So that is still ongoing with me, that investigation. It's taken me into the world of the jinn right now, but it's certainly taken me into the cages of serial killers, over to Northern Ireland. That was part of it. Was the real IRA evil? Did they carry out the Omar bomb? There's a lot of muddied water around there, around the Omar bomb, a lot of dirty doings. Another book that I picked up was The Dirty War, again by the same author, Martin Dillon, an amazing writer, and I really educate myself from reading that book. So where Carrie has to start on the Marilyn Monroe subject is to go and get really good books on other people that have investigated the death of Marilyn Monroe. So you first, when you start walking down your investigative path, you tread the same pathway as others have before you. And you do that by books, you do that by articles, and you collate them. You could keep a file And in the file, you list newspaper reports, you list books, you buy the books, you get your yellow pen, and you go through and you yellow pen highlighted chapters that you find interesting and you want to follow up. And then you start looking at their sources. And you only look at the sources that you find interesting, such as in The Dirty War by Martin Dillon. He mentioned a journalist called Martin O'Hagan. Now, Martin O'Hagan was kidnapped by the South Armagh Brigade of the IRA. The South Armagh Brigade of the IRA alerted my attention as I read about, the whole situation over there, because it was the deepest, the darkest, the most terrifying brigade. So I thought, if there is this darkness, whatever it is there, is it man, is it supernatural, it will be in South Armagh Brigade, obviously, if that's the deepest, darkest, deadliest. And the South Armagh Brigade, of course, was in a no-go area. You can travel to the place where what you're investigating is carried out. I certainly went to South Armagh a few times, circled it. It's a no-go area. So when I started, I didn't actually go inside it. It was more like circling, smelling, inhaling, really getting the feel of where it is, what you're investigating. Was carried out. For instance, regarding Marilyn Monroe, you could go to her grave in Westwood, you could go to restaurants that she went to, Chasen's, Morton's in Hollywood. A lot of them have gone, but you could go there, you could really soak her up. What is it like to be her, to feel her for yourself? It's always important to feel for yourself, because a lot of writers don't get that over. And of course, you're beginning your own investigation, and then carry on making notes about that for your files. When I started on Northern Ireland, I had a cork board, and I put pictures of various people up on the cork board that I was interested in, various places, various notes, and I began to keep files. Just the paper ones you get from M&S, the different coloured ones. I put a white sticker on individuals, places, books, and I kept these various files and then filled them up with various bits of information from scrap exercise books. And then you're well on your way. Then you're starting down your road. For instance, the guy who did the Netflix documentary on the seascape, he would have started by reading books about what was going on with the fish and the dolphins, reading other people's work online, and making his own notes. And whatever jumped out at him, whatever jumps out at you, whatever makes your heart beat faster and you think, oh, whatever draws your interest, you've got to follow your own instincts. So going back to my own interest in Northern Ireland, it was Martin O'Hagan, this fearless journalist, who seemed quite enigmatic, who had encountered the great darkness of the South Armagh Brigade. He had basically made up stories about them because he knew they were a little bit like Howard Hughes, and nobody could check them because nobody knew, nobody had contact with the South Armagh Brigade, and it was pretty secretive, even though it was said to be ran. Who was it run by at that time? There was whispers about who ran it, but nobody really knew. So he was kidnapped by them, tortured by them. So I knew that my first port of call would be Martin O'Hagan. So he works for the Sunday World. I rang him. It's a good idea if you've got some kind of credential at that point. Now the credential it's probably best if you're attached to a newspaper of some kind. Now it's really easy to do that even if you're not attached to a newspaper. What you do, you get your idea for a story, you ring up one of the newspapers and you say, I've got this idea for a story, would you be interested in seeing it? Now when they say to you, oh yes we would, send it in, then you've got your backing from a newspaper. So when you approach your person, like I approach Martin O'Hagan, it's Christine Hart from the Sunday Mirror, or it's Christine Hart from the Daily Mail. Try and make it a good newspaper. That I made a big mistake by using the Mail. I worked for the Mail as a private investigator, but I made a big mistake in Northern Ireland saying it's Christine Hart from the Daily Mail. A lot of them were socialists and they absolutely hated the Daily Mail. So make sure who you're speaking to will respect the publication that you've chosen, or you could say freelance. But it's just worrying out there, and unless you've got a big hook, somebody hearing something like that, they might just dismiss you. They might think this isn't worth my time. So try, and when you contact them, make yourself sound interesting, make yourself sound upbeat, give your voice a high energy. If you're better at emails, approach them by an email, but try and arouse their interest in some way, shape, or form. And then, if you're really lucky, they will meet you. Whether it be a coffee, a drink. I was lucky with Martin O'Hagan. The next time I was out in Belfast, he said, let's go for a drink. And I went for a drink with him. And, I said, I'm very interested in the South Armagh Brigade. He then said to me, you should interview a cop. Oh gosh, I forgot his name, but he was the police officer investigating the Omagh bomb. And he then invited me to come and see him, and he spoke about the South Armagh Brigade and told me it was run by a man called Liam Campbell. And then I was looking again, doing my research, reading newspapers constantly, having an update on my computer about news stories. Whenever there was a news story about Northern Ireland here in the UK, I would look through it. I would look through to see what journalists were covering it, whether they were good papers or not. I would make a note of them, and I would make a note of their sources. Now, sometimes people put their sources in stories, and if they've got a good source, obviously you want to cultivate that source. I remember with a man called Terry Harkin, I found him in the Irish News. I had gone down to Kilburn, and I had really circled the whole IRA issue for a long, long time. And sometimes it can take years. I literally had got to the point where I didn't know how to research the IRA. I had no idea. And I was literally going to pubs in Kilburn. I mean, how silly is that? But I just had no idea. Even though at the time I was working as a private investigator for the News of the World and the Daily Mail, and I had access to people supposedly who knew how to investigate things. But I quickly learned that newspapers don't know how to investigate. They don't know at all. They, a lot of the time, get fed stories. In fact, 99% of the time, papers don't investigate. They get fed stories and then they stamp on it investigation. So that's how they work actually. There obviously are some that do proper in-depth, the broadsheets, proper in-depth investigations. But again, a lot of times they are helped. They're fed stuff from this, and they call it in-depth investigation. So we all read it and think, oh wow, that's it's amazing, but it's actually information they haven't investigated. They've merely been told it by their contacts. So there's a saying that you're only as good as your contacts. And being a researcher, being an investigator it's a very social thing. You can't do it on your own. You have to reach out to other people. And so going back to how I started, I literally would go down to Kilburn and ask, would anybody know the IRA, which is very silly, probably dangerous. And that went on for a year, maybe more. And talking to Irish cab drivers, I mean, silly. But I had no idea. How do you investigate the IRA? Who knows? But I had such a passion that I thought, well, my instinct led me. And it was one day when I was looking at the Irish news and somebody had written about the INLA. Didn't know who that was, had to Google it. And they are supposedly the most vicious paramilitary organization there is. That was news to me. And this journalist had quoted someone called Terry Harkin, who was from their political wing, which is the same thing, but never mind. And I thought, there you go, I want that contact. So I merely rang up the journalist in question and said, I'm trying to, again, I gave my credentials. I said, I'm working for working for the Sunday Mirror. I can't remember which paper. I picked a softer one, remembering this is probably a socialist, and said, "Oh, could I speak to your contact?" And some journalists are generous, some aren't, and so interestingly, he gave me Terry's number. I met Terry in a pub. He had a security guy who questioned me. Then I had to pass through another few tests and eventually got to speak to him. And it was he that introduced me around to some others. And then I found myself, instead of walking, I was running. And what happens, you kind of have to be like a little worm, and a little worm eating through paper, and you slowly chomp your way through the paper until you find yourself meeting sources and meeting contacts that nobody else has met. And it does take years, it takes a long time. I eventually, then after years, it was about 3 years, I moved over lock, stock, and barrel to Belfast. And when I was there, I started getting stories that were so good. The Sunday Times came to me and headhunted me to work for them in Northern Ireland on the terrorist movements out there, all of them actually. And once you get your contacts can't just be one particular group. You can't just be Northern Ireland just going for the terrorist groups. You have to again liaise with the police. You have to liaise with special branch, and you get yourself known then. And I got really good stories because my contacts were unusual, and they were contacts that others didn't have because I had burrowed away like a little mouse chewing. And at some points, especially regarding the Real IRA are actually South Armagh Brigade. And, not many people know that, but they are a certain brigade. There was a meeting in Donegal, in Gweedore, and they refused to go along the Good Friday Agreement, and they decided to walk out, led by Michael McKevitt, and they were all friends actually, and they were all South Armagh Brigade and Dundalk, and I didn't know which particular names were down there. It was only when I met up with Eric Anderson, that's it, the cop investigating the Omar Bob. He said, I was very interested in a man called Mooch Blair, and he said, Mooch Blair, as a bomb maker, you really want to meet Liam Campbell. Liam Campbell rules South Armagh. So I had this name in my head, and the next time there was an arranged meeting, it was quite interesting. When the next time I arranged a meeting, the Real IRA's political wing, 32 County Sovereignty Movement, was having a meeting in South Armagh, and I went down there, and of course it was odd. It was right in the centre of South Armagh, and I got into a cab, and as soon as I got into the cab driver said, "Oh, we've got a tail on us." And it was usual that when you enter that area, you get a tail on you. They don't like strangers. And I went straight to the meeting, and there was loads of cops in unmarked cars sitting there. And I went up to them, being naturally curious by nature, and said, "Oh, who are you? Are you IRA men?" They just looked at me. They wouldn't reply. I found out later they were special branch, and there was about 20 of them outside the meeting, which was in like a hut. I went up to the journalists outside. The BBC was there. The Panorama guy was there. I can't remember his name. And a few journalists, 4 or 5 Irish journalists. I rang the Sunday Mirror in Northern Ireland and said, "I'm at the meeting, do you want me to cover it?" They said yes. So that gives you then the clout of being with a paper. I stood there and thought, hang on, I've gone through that whole painful experience of having a car tail me, and it's just it's scary because I was a woman alone, and then you look round, there's 3 skinhead looking guys in flak jackets in a car behind you, and you know that they can pull over the taxi and say, right, you get out. And so I'd got myself into a state of tension. I wasn't very happy. And so I thought I've gone through that. I feel tense. I feel greatly paranoid at this point. I'm not going to feel tense and feel paranoid and stand out here with journalists like, like little slaves wanting crumbs. So I went up to the person on the door and I said, and this is where you have to push yourself as well. I said, oh, I'm a delegate. He said, where from? I said, a delegate from London. A delegate is one of their people. And so he gave me a badge to say I was one of them. It's quite funny. And I went inside their private meeting. And when I got in there, I started to feel even more paranoid because I thought, hang on, they're going to say. And, I did wonder what I was doing, but I just pushed myself on. This is very early days for me with this, before I'd moved to Belfast. And so I thought, what do I do? And there was a really good-looking man sitting there, and I thought, wow, he looks nice. And so I plonked myself next to the officer commanding the Real IRA, Liam Campbell. Didn't know at the time, but I sat down, plonked myself next to him, and proceeded to whisper to him about what was going on. He said, "You from England then?" And I said, "Yes." And then I started to get a little bit more paranoid because I was a journalist and they don't like them. They really don't like them in a quite aggressive way. Then I went in. We drifted into the bar, all of us, and still the journalists were outside. And I sat down and had a meal with them. And during the meal, the Liam Campbell sat opposite me. I didn't know who he was at this point. He sat opposite me and he started to get paranoid about me. He said, I don't like you, and you should tell me who you actually are. And that escalated my paranoia. And he then got me out in the hallway, was kind of like putting his face in mine. And he was really angry. And I then got angry at him. And I said, yeah, I'm a journalist, actually. I mean, here, you guys let me in a really rather stupid way. And I ripped my badge off at that point. And I was angry. I don't like being threatened. I tend to go into a state where I don't care. And I went into that state. I was raging and shaking with anger at this man. And I thought, mate, you don't look like IRA at all. And so I said to him, I'm writing a novel. That's why I'm here. And I want to meet the head of the South Armagh Brigade. But don't worry, mate, because nobody on God's earth is going to think that you are ever in the IRA. No one is going to mistake you for an IRA man. I pushed him in the tit. And then I walked off and I went outside at that point. And yeah, I wasn't very happy. I was shaking. I was angry. I filed copy over to the Sunday Mirror about the meeting. And then this guy, saying Mr. Paranoid, came out and everybody, all the photographers started banging him off, taking pictures. And I was like, why? Who's that? And then someone said to me, it's Liam Campbell, Officer Commanding South Armagh Brigade of the Real IRA. So that was my first experience of Campbell. And yeah, that's, from then on in, what happened is mostly in my book. I was like, that was my target. And so that's how it starts. It starts in a really messy way, doing investigations. And, I got to a point where I got so close to the South Armagh Brigade that I would, go down there. I'd go down there and stay in houses. And when I moved over there, I was interviewed by Henry MacDonald, who's the investigative editor of The Observer. He took me out to dinner. He said, how do you do it? How are your stories that bang on? And, it's quite interesting. And it was nice that, I got that respect. I was taken out by the Guardian girl, Rosie, I can't remember her second name. She again said to me, how did you do it? And I suppose maybe I did it because I had a background as a private investigator. And I remember working as a private detective for an ex-CID officer called Frank Battis. And I got a job coming to the office, and really we just used to get handed files, and I got handed a file and I went to Frank and I said, Frank, I don't know how to do this. And Frank was a little bit like Burnside off of that program, The Bill. And he said to me, lean back in his chair. It's quite a scary guy. And he said to me, what does it say on the door there? And I said, Investigations Department. And he said, is that where you sit? Have you got a desk there? And I said, yeah, I've got a desk there. And he said, well, why, if you've got a desk there, are you coming to me and asking me how to investigate? And he slapped the file down the desk and said, if you can't do it, you can just leave. So I went back into the office and I did it. And I always look back and I thank Frank for that day, because he pushed me into a state of mind where I thought, I can do this, I can. And with that state of mind, I can, was how I decided to investigate what was going on in Northern Ireland. And, you know, when I read about Steak Knife, there's a book, an investigative book, Steak Knife, about running agents. I was very curious. And a chap called Lewis Panther of the News of the World had written an article about this man from this elite army outfit called the Force Research Unit, who had gone over to Northern Ireland and acted as assassins, and they had basically gone in and started shooting the IRA, and, you know, basically fought for the British side by colluding with the UDA. And they had acted, they're in the movie. There's a movie on Netflix, or maybe it's Amazon, called 71. It's a very good movie. And they play the part, there's guys in there that are plain clothes. There's army guys and there's plain clothes guys. And the plain clothes guys carrying the guns, they are the Force Research Unit. There's some pictures of them online. I'll try and put one up with this video. And Lewis Panther had done a story on this, one of them. One of them had written a book called Fishers of Men, called Phil Campbell Smith. And he called himself a different name. The story was how, again, he'd been out to South Armagh. And I thought, well, I must meet this guy. So I said to Lewis, please, can I have the phone number of the contact? Now, he had finished doing the stories. I didn't particularly like Lewis. I didn't like anybody who worked at that newspaper, or many other newspapers, actually. Journalists are funny. I did clash being a private investigator with journalists. They seemed to me to be sadistic. They seemed to me to not want to investigate, more to rip people apart. And I noticed that, and I didn't like it. So I tended not to like them and see them almost as like gatekeepers in some kind of way. So Lewis Panther, a little bit of a gatekeeper. I think he said no. There was a little bit of disagreement there with me and he, a little bit of nastiness, and I can't remember. I think he said no, and then I went above his head and said he won't give me this, and, you know, I need this because I can do a big story on this, and there was a bit of manipulation, and I finally got this guy's phone number, and I remember ringing him, driving through London, and saying, oh, hi, you know, I'm doing a book here. I wasn't doing a book. I just wanted to investigate for myself. I think, actually, I don't even know now. People have told me about this Monarch program. But I was very passionate. And I met him down in the Edgware Road in a cafe called Salt. He said, you know, what are you doing? I said, I'm writing an investigative book. And found him really, really attractive, actually, really attractive. He is in that movie called The 71 on Amazon. He is the guy with the moustache and the longish hair, the one that's really kind of, you know, gung-ho, and he is portrayed there. So he's really male, and I was really attracted to him, and he said, you need to come back to... He was staying in some army barracks, and he said, oh, come back with me to my room, and I'll get you some paperwork of, you know, what you want. He was really, what's the word for it? Laissez-faire, impressive, and I decided to go back to his room with him, and we got to the it's this military barracks. So he said, "Oh, I'm just bringing her into blah de blah. She's a journalist." And the guy at the gate said, "No, no, no, she can't come in. She's a civilian." And he got, oh man, he was so angry with him. He threatened him and all sorts. And this guy was like, "No, no, 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 no." And so he walked me back to my car, and therein started a very deep friendship. I mean, I had a very deep friendship with Terry Harkin, the INLA commander, but also with Phil Campbell Smith from the Frew. We would talk to each other, I don't know, about 3 or 4 times a day about this and that. There's just some people you just hit it off with, and I did with him, and he took me down to Shepherd's Market in London. We would drink down there. He was working for the XMI6 agency, Company X, which is CIEX in French, to hide what they are. He was working for them, and that was before I worked for them. And he was also working for some people at The Guardian. And who was he working for at The Guardian? And there was a guy called Paul Halloran. Paul Halloran and I just had an argument recently online. He said I didn't work for CIX Limited. Oh, actually, Paul, I did. I'm afraid I've got, bank statements to prove it. And it doesn't mean that you're special in any way. So Paul, actually, I met Paul with Phil. He had just written a book called Thatcher's Gold. And Phil introduced me to an SAS guy called Charlie Johnson. And, I was pretty much hitting the ground running then with, I was pretty much up to my balls in the whole thing. And interestingly, at that point, Martin Ingram, who was Martin Ingram was through as well, and he had gone to Liam Clark, and he was spilling his guts about what the Frew did in Northern Ireland. And I was getting the inside track from Phil Smith, but I wasn't putting it in the newspaper. I wanted it to know for myself. And so anyway, there's a D notice all over Phil. So I don't think what he was telling me would have got in the newspaper anyway. And Phil was with the rest of the Frew. And the rest of the Frew had become bodyguards to the royal family. And interestingly, one day I was talking to Clive Goodman at the News of the World up in their offices, and he said, "Oh, what are you doing later?" I said, "I'm going out with the Frew." And he said, "Oh, aren't most of them like guarding the royal family?" And I said, "Yeah, yeah, yeah." And he said, "Well, they lost Harry one time. I think Harry was pretty young. They lost Harry at a party." He said, "If you can stand that up," he said, "that'll be cool." Anyway, I went to this pub in Shepherd's Market, met the rest of the Frew boys with Phil. And they were very angry about Martin Ingram spewing all their secrets to the Sunday Times. And one of them came up to me and said, "Oh, are you working with the Sunday Times?" And I said, "Well, I have." And he said, "Liam Clark." And I said, "Well, yeah, I have, because, Northern Ireland is my thing. So, of course, I have." And he said, "You're in with Martin Ingram." I said, "I'm not in with Martin Ingram, Martin Hurst, rather." And he said, "Because if you are, we will take you right out now to the River Thames and throw you in with a cloth, with something over your head, whatever, and tie some boulders to your feet." He got it really. I'd have the boulders. I wouldn't be able to swim back up. And I was really angry, and I was going to not disrespect them by asking them about Harry. I thought, it's kind of disrespectful, isn't you, drinking with people and you're like spying on them? So I thought, right, mate, you don't talk to me like that, and I'm going to disrespect you now. So I kind of laughed that off, even though inside I was like boiling. And I said, "You're guarding the royal family, aren't you? Do you do Harry?" And he goes, "Yeah." I said, "Oh, I heard." He didn't even ask where I'd heard. I'd heard that he got lost at the party. And he went, "Yeah, I remember that. We were looking for him everywhere. We lost him for a full 10 minutes and we found him with a girl, blah, de, blah." So I got the inside track on that particular story, just as a kind of slap back for him, threatening me in that way. Eventually they left, and I was left with Phil, who sat up at the bar with me, and bizarrely, at that point, because I would term us as friends, went into a kind of weird chat where he was describing how he used to kill people, with his bare hands. And that was weird. maybe some kind of sex talk, who knows. But we went on against Shepherd's Market, and then he got back in my car. I had a little sports car, Lotus at the time, and we were driving along the embankment. And I said, "Where are you going? Where should I drop you?" And you were at your place. And I had to open the door and just push him out on my feet. How often he just fell on the pavement because I don't know. I mean, he was certainly a beautiful looking man. But it just, once I'm friends with somebody, I just can't go there. So we were friends for just a massive amount of time, and then he started working for the News of the World, and then ended up on Panorama at the end of Panorama, where he went into a cafe and threatened Martin Hurst and said he'd been hacking him, and they filmed him doing that, and he basically got nicked and arrested. And then Operation Telliter came to interview me about him and said, was he hacking celebrities? And, Phil Smith isn't somebody that you would ever sit there and grass up no matter what you knew about him, because literally he would come in through your window and, men like that, no. So I had a really interesting meeting with Operation Tilliter, who came to my tennis club. I was a member at that point, and interviewed me about him, and I didn't tell him anything. So that was interesting, and so that is. I hope I've helped you, Carrie. You're young, you've got your whole life ahead of you. I would like my son to do investigative journalism, but I said to him, get your qualifications, study English literature so you can talk fancy. That takes you a hell of a long way. But mostly investigative journalism isn't about the writing, because, once you get it down on paper, the subbies will edit it however they want. So journalism isn't really about writing, but it's nice to have that if ever you want to go out on your own, if ever you want to write investigative books. So I would say study English literature, get that command of the British language, get the command of your language, become a wordsmith, because then you've got the tools to tell your story. Get that. You don't need to do a degree in journalism. I don't. Basically when I was working as a private investigator for the press, hanging out with other journalists, it's easy. They told me you got your opening paragraph where you have to have your story, you've got your bullet points, and then you've got underneath all your quotes and all your sources. And then, as you were saying, Carrie, to be an investigative journalist, that, be prepared for the long haul on investigating what you're interested in. I mean, I literally got into the bowels of Northern Ireland. I got that by the time I moved out there, I was a player. I'm not saying that to boast. I'm saying that because I enjoyed myself. It was like a big smorgasbord of a playground. There was this player, that player, and I found it fascinating. And the more you became a player, the more you were known, and the higher you traveled, and the more you found out, and the more you got the respect of your peers. I did get to such a point where I felt I should go home. And of course, I was pregnant with my son, and I just became a totally different personality. I became a mother, and that side of me that enjoyed that world disappeared and was never seen again, which makes me sad on a daily basis because it was a part of me. So I'm talking about things almost, stories that I remember, but almost as if it was someone else. I don't have that side of me that wouldn't feel very scared if I was threatened right now. It just seems to have gone. Maybe is that age? I don't know. But that's gone. But investigating is fascinating. And what you do, wow, it's noisy here. What you do is you walk a road that's been trodden by other investigators in front of you, and you get your sources from them, and eventually from those sources you get other sources of. Could you be quiet, please? You get other sources, and then you make your own sources, and your own contacts, and you forge your way. So it starts off with walking the same path as everyone else, and then you get to carve out your own little niche. Um, my niche over there, what was it really? I was very interested in the whole underworld of agents. I got to the point where um, agents, undercover agents. Yeah, I find it really interesting. I found the Fru fascinating. I found the crossover with MI6's activities. I interviewed Peter Fulton when who was involved with Frank Scappaticci, Steak Knife, codename Steak Knife, when he came to London. And it's interesting, MI6's involvement. He said to me that, he worked for MI6 when he was there, he was an agent, and he went into the barn where Mooch Blair was making the Omar bomb, and he was covered in white powder, and he went and reported that back, and he told me that MI6 followed the bomb car all the way to Omar. Now, as people know, that was, where they were going to park the car. The courthouse was full up. The target was the courthouse. It was full up, and they had to park down the street. And then the call with the code word went in. There's a bomb in the high street, but of course, because they already thought it was at the courthouse, acting on prior information, the people were herded towards the bomb. And of course, then sympathy for the IRA was finished. You can draw whatever conclusions you want from that particular story. I'm not going to draw any because it's dangerous. Not that anybody listens to me anymore. I'm not a player. But that struck me as interesting. The whole, as Martin Dillon says, is a dirty war. And, it was fought hard and nasty. And the harder and the nastier the people were the ones who won, who came through in the end. The ruthlessness, the sheer ruthlessness of it, and the fact that what we heard wasn't really the truth of what was going on out there. That was what I found was quite interesting. I put a lot of it in my book, In for the Kill, but not that much. I'm republishing that soon, so I'll drop a link below about that. So please don't buy In for the Kill. Because it's just notes really, and I didn't make any money out of that book, none at all, so I don't really trust the publisher, so please don't buy that. As I say, I'm writing another one, which is that, but sort of in large. So this will all be in there, and I'll drop a link below when I get a link for it. It's just a small publisher, but still. So I hope I've helped you, Carrie. I hope, you can give me some feedback below. I hope I've helped people on that path to be an investigative journalist, that, it takes slow movement and to follow other people, to get your contacts and forge other contacts, other links. And it starts off slow. I used to go down to Kilburn. I went from, being, knowing the command of the real IRA to actually going to Kilburn and just sitting there. It just seems mad, but that's how I started. And that went on for about 2 years. So it's really slow. And the slower you go, I think the more successful you can be. And then, you find your own pathway. Things, it does happen like magic, that things get put in front of you. And, you end up riding high. I really enjoyed that whole experience. Don't know what it was for. Look back and think what was all that about. But certainly worked really, really hard out there. I don't know, was I part of the Monarch program, but I certainly did a lot of investigations that didn't end up anywhere. But that's another story. Anyway, so I hope I've helped you, Carrie. I'm just going to end this now, and anybody else who's listening, God bless.